Love, peace, and wisdom to everyone tuning in right now. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining me today. I am your host, the one and only hero, GMR Jones, member of Team Osiris and the Street Sufis. And today I want to talk to you all about covert psychological manipulation techniques, or what is dark psychology. Now, imagine if there was a system of psychology that allowed practitioners to persuade, influence, and manipulate your thinking, your feelings, and your actions so that they can get from you what it is that they want, even if it's to your own detriment. Well, there is such a system, and that system is called NLP, or what is neuro linguistic programming. Now, NLP, or neuro linguistic programming, is many things, but one of the things that NLP is a system of psychology that many of the very higher ups, many of the very elites within our society, and even some individuals within this so-called conscious community use in order to influence and manipulate you. And so, what I want to do in this presentation today, the first in a series of presentations on NLP, is to introduce NLP to you all so that you'll be able to recognize when someone is using it on you so that you can protect yourselves. And so, NLP, dark psychology, introduction to NLP, coming up next. Stay tuned. And so, as you can see, today's show is titled NLP, the good, the bad, the ugly of covert psychological manipulation techniques. And before we dive into the discussion on NLP, the details, I want to say that NLP is not necessarily a nefarious practice or nefarious technology. What it comes down to is the individuals who are using NLP and their intentions behind it that will determine whether NLP is bad or good. And so, NLP is similar to, let's say, fire, in the respects that you can take fire and you can use fire to cook your food or to warm your home, or you can take fire and you can use it to burn down things and destroy them. And so it depends on the individual who is using that fire and their intentions with that fire that will determine whether or not it is good or bad. And so likewise, NLP, or neuro linguistic programming, is the same way. It depends on the intentions and the individual who are using NLP that will determine whether or not it is bad or it is good. So I wanted to state that for you, and now let's get into the presentation. Let's get to the first slide. So, what exactly is NLP? Well, NLP began in the 1970s with three individuals, Richard Bandler, Frank Pusnick, and John Grinder. Um, Richard Bandler and Frank Pusnick were students at the University of Santa Cruz in California. Bandler was a mathematician, and he lived with a psychologist at the time that he was attending the University of Santa Cruz in California. Also, Bandler worked at a printing press, and he was given the task of translating the works of the psychologist Fritz Perls. Fritz Perls is the founder of what is Gestalt therapy, and Bandler was tasked with translating his work into English. Frank Pusnick was a war vet, right? And Frank Pusnick was a close friend of Richard Bandler. Frank Pusnick also dealt with many mental issues that resulted from his time spent in fighting in the wars. And so, because Frank Pusnick and Bandler were friends, and Richard Bandler, being the innovative guy that he is, he decided, hey, let's see if I could use this Gestalt therapy stuff that I had been learning when I was translating this book of Fritz Perls, because Bandler was very accustomed to studying the psychological works of the psychologists that he lived with, all of his books, and he was very interested in studying and learning the technology that Fritz Perls developed and Gestalt psychology, Gestalt therapy. And so this is what they did. After school, Bandler and Pusnick would hold sessions whereby they would utilize what Bandler had learned of Gestalt therapy on, or with Pusnick, and they would get amazing results. And so, Richard Bandler and Frank Pusnik, the things they were doing became very popular around the school. Many people had began to hear about what they were doing and became very interested. And so they kind of, got a gathering of students who wanted to, learn what they were doing and understand it. And so they began holding, more and more sessions, more after classes, at the school. And so Richard Bandler and Frank Pusnik were doing a great job with performing the actions, going through the motions of what it was that um, the start therapy had to offer, and they were good at getting great results. However, they ran into an issue, and the issue was that uh, they did not understand why or how, what they were doing was working as well as it did. And so Bandler had a great idea. He figured let's invite um, one of our professors, a linguistics professor, whose name is John Grinder, to come and sit in on our sessions to see if he can identify some patterns of behaviors, of actions, maybe in syntax, about what it is they were doing, in order to see if he can discover how and what they were doing, the details of it, so that they will be able to better understand and better communicate and teach what they were doing to the students. And so Grander obliged, and he did just that. Grander sat in on a session, and he was blown away by what he saw Richard Bandler and Frank Pusnik doing. And so Richard asked, you know, Grander to, see if he can identify patterns. And Grander was able to identify patterns in what they were doing and patterns in syntax, and they began to break down step by step, in an organized way, what it is that was actually happening when they were doing this Gestalt therapy. And so Richard Bandler and John Grander became very, very close friends over the time that they did this work together. And so one day they had the idea that, hey, if we can do this with this Gestalt therapy, if we can figure out what we were doing and how we were doing it, let's see if why don't we just see if we can do the same thing with other successful psychologists and their works. So what they did was they studied the famous family psychologist or psychiatrist Virginia Satir. She's very popular in her day for getting amazing results with families. And so they studied her work. They studied what she did, how she spoke, various idiosyncrasies in her ability to get the results that she was able to get. And they did find patterns in what she was doing. And so one day, Grander and Bandler, they met a guy named Gregory Bateson. And Gregory Bateson saw what Bandler and Grander was doing, and he was completely blown away. And so he offered um, Bandler and Grander the opportunity to meet with a very famous psychotherapist, a hypnotherapist to be exact. Hypnotherapist's name was Milton H. Erickson. And so Bandler and Grander did meet with Erickson, and they decided, hey, okay, we're going to see if we can do the same thing with Erickson that we did with Virginia Satir and the works of Fritz Perls. And they were successful. They were able to identify patterns of behaviors and actions that Milton H. Erickson was doing that got him his amazing results. And so that is how NLP began. NLP began as a system of modeling, a system of mapping out excellent behaviors. And with this model, with this skill of modeling excellent behaviors, excellent skills, what they did with NLP is they went on to model many different fields, many different skills from different individuals, and they put together what came to become known as NLP. Now, over the years, many of their students and many other individuals have come to contribute to the overall formation of what we have today as neurolinguistic programming. Now, that's just a little bit of history I want to give you. I don't want to go too much into the history, but give you just enough that you can do your own research on it and learn more if that's what you're interested in. So now let's move on to the next slide. And so if you look at your screen, you can see that NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Now, to understand this term, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, it would be beneficial for us to break down each word in the term. And so the first word in the term Neuro-Linguistic Programming is neuro, and that is the N in NLP. And so what the N in NLP stands for is our neurology, or our nervous system, through which we gather and process information via our five sense modalities. So that is, we take in visual information through our eyes, auditory information through our ears, olfactory information through our nose, gustatory information through our tongue, and we take in kinesthetic information uh, through our nervous system that runs throughout our body, and the nerve endings that are at the surface of our skin. And so the important thing to note is that when we have an experience, whether it is an internal experience or we are experiencing our environment, what happens is when we gather information and we process this information, what our mind does or our brain does is it makes a model of our experience, right? So it makes this model of our experience and it creates what are called internal representations. Internal representations. Now, internal representations are divided into the various sense modalities that we use in order to have experience. So that means that our brain or our mind maps or models our experience in terms of what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, and what we can feel, right? And so these internal representations are how we make sense of our experience, and they are the language or the linguistics of NLP. And so this brings us to the next letter. Next letter is L, and that is for linguistics. And the important thing to know is that when we are speaking about language in NLP, we are not only talking about the words we use, but we are also speaking about the non-verbal communication systems through which we represent and give order to and give meaning to our experiences. And so what that is that our language is how we code our experiences, and we code our experiences and create internal representations through pictures, through sounds, through feelings, through taste, through smells, and through the use of words. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Now, the next slide is programming, right? Now, this is a very interesting aspect of NLP because, you know, there's programming all around us today. We are constantly being bombarded with so much information, with so many different people, corporations, media, trying to get our attention and influence how we spend our attention and our time and how we spend our money. And so we are always being programmed. And one popular saying in NLP is that if you're not programming yourself, then somebody else will. And so the P is for programming. And programming is the ability to discover and utilize the programs that we run, that is, the habits and the strategies of thinking, feeling, and behavior that is in our neurology or our mental systems that we use in order to achieve our specific desire, goals, and outcomes. And so, in a nutshell, in other words, NLP is how we consistently use the programming language of our minds to achieve our specific desires, goals, and outcomes. And that is NLP. And so, as I mentioned in the introduction to this presentation, that NLP is many things, many things, because NLP has come to model many different fields of study and many different individuals, the successful skills that they have and the successful methods that they utilize in order to achieve their skills. NLP modeled this, and so because NLP modeled many different individuals in many fields, NLP is many things, and it is not something that is so easy to narrow down to any specific definition or any specific meaning. And so there are several meanings of NLP, and now we are going to take a look at some of the definitions of NLP and what it is. So on your screen, you can see that NLP is the study of the structure of subjective experience. NLP is the study of the structure of subjective experience. And this is a very important thing to understand because again, NLP is about how we utilize our internal representations, the language of our mind, the language of our nervous system, in order to direct our thinking, our feelings, and our actions, in order to, you know, negate or nullify those results in our lives that we don't want, and to utilize the language of our minds, our mental capabilities, our mental programs, the programming language of our mind, in order that to get the results that we do want in our lives. And so NLP is the study of the structure of subjective experience. And studying the structure of subjective experience gives us the understanding and the skills in order to achieve what we want using this tool and this technology of NLP. So next we have NLP is the influence of language on our mind and subsequent behavior. Now that's powerful, and that this bullet point will be the focus of this series. We want to be talking about how language is used to influence your thinking, your feelings, and your actions. And remember, in NLP, when we are speaking about language, we aren't just talking about the words that we use. We are also talking about nonverbal communication techniques, so communication skills. So that would also include things like body language. Body language is very important. The very subtle things that we do when we communicate, that communicates at a very subtle level that goes underneath our conscious awareness. So NLP or language in NLP includes these aspects as well as the use of our words and how we use our words. Next, we have NLP is the systematic study of human communication. The systematic study of human communication. That goes with the last one. This presentation and the ones to come are about how we use our communication to effectively persuade, influence, and manipulate people, as well as ourselves. Now let's be clear here. Let's be honest. Whenever we communicate with others, we are trying to persuade or influence or manipulate people. I'm trying to influence you now with this presentation, with the words I am saying. When you speak to your children, or when you speak to your boss, or you speak to your friends, or you guys are trying to influence and persuade one another. This is natural. This is what comes with socializing, being social creatures. The difference I want to make sure you understand here is that intention behind your reason for influencing and persuading really matters, because not everyone is out here trying to influence and persuade and manipulate people for nefarious reasons, or to get people to do things that would be against their own detriment so that the practitioner or the manipulator can benefit. So I want to make that distinctive, that distinction, excuse me. Next, we have NLP is the method for modeling excellence so that it can be duplicated. And that's something we spoke about when we were talking about what is NLP in the beginning. NLP began as a system of modeling excellence. That's what it did. It looked at the things that amazing performers were doing, and it said, okay, let's break down step by step in detail what it is they are doing so that we'll be able to give this model to other individuals so that they can duplicate that same successful behavior. Going on to the next slide. So here we have more definitions of NLP. So we have NLP is an accelerated learning strategy for the detection and the utilization of patterns in the world. Again, NLP is an accelerated learning strategy for the detection and utilization of patterns in the world. And so this is easy to understand how NLP can be an accelerated learning tool when we understand that NLP is a method for modeling excellent behavior. So in being able to model excellent behavior, right, and being able to share that model with other individuals, people can then use that model to accelerate their learning of a new skill. So in that way, NLP is an accelerated learning technology. And that statement was made by John Grinder, who you should know by now is one of the founders of NLP. Next, we have NLP is an attitude and a methodology which leave behind a trail of techniques. And this is very important to understand because NLP is an attitude of childlike curiosity and experimentation. NLP takes the attitude, let's discover, let's explore, and see what we can do with the language of our minds. Let's see what we can accomplish when we change the structure of the pictures and sounds and smells and the different feelings that we experience within our mind. Let's see if we organize them in different ways and do different things to them, make them brighter, push them back, bring them closer, move them around. Let's see what we can accomplish. And from that, many of the various techniques that is NLP are born out of that attitude of childlike curiosity and experimentation. And that statement was made by Richard Bandler, who is also one of the original founders of NLP. Next, you see we have NLP is whatever works. It's whatever works. See, NLP models excellent skills. It models the things that people did that were successful. It modeled how they did that and how they accomplished that success. And so successful behaviors is what works. And NLP models that. And so NLP is whatever works. And that statement is from Robert Dilts, who was one of the original students of Bandler and Grander, and he is also an individual who contributed greatly to what became to be formed as NLP or Neuro Linguistic Programming. Next, we have NLP is the study of results. See, this is what NLP is all about. It's about getting results. It is outcome oriented. NLP is, and so excellent behavior, getting the results we want, nullifying or negating the results that we don't want. This is what NLP is about. Let's get rid of the results we don't want, and let's figure out how to get the results we do want. So NLP is the study of results. Next, we have NLP is mental emotional mastery. Now, this is amazing. This is an amazing skill in NLP. It reminds me of meditation in a way that NLP allows you to observe the various actions of your mind, of your internal experience, in a way that allows you to have some kind of ability to shape your inner experience, your inner emotions, your mental perspectives, and your mental actions. NLP allows this, and then being able to have this kind of strategic ability to shape your inner experience, shape your mental and emotional states, then NLP is mental emotional mastery. Next, we have NLP is a user's manual for the brain. Now, with everything that has been said here, this last statement should easily be accessible to you, most agreeable to you, because that's all we have spoken about so far in these definitions of NLP is how NLP gives you the power, gives you some control over your inner states, over your emotional states, over the way we use our minds and our emotions, and the various internal representations that we create through our processing and gathering information in order to achieve specific results in our lives. And so in that way, yes, NLP is a user's manual for the mind or for the brain. Now let's go to the next slide. So, story time. Now, with all that has been said, I want to now tell you a story that will help you understand what NLP is. At least that is my intention. So the story goes like this. One day, a little boy walked up to his mother who was cooking in the kitchen, and he looked at his mother and said, "Mom, can you please tell me about that NLP stuff you're always talking about?" And the mother looked down at her son and said, "Oh yes, son, I'll tell you what NLP is, but before I do, you please go into the living room and ask your grandfather How's his arthritis today? Ask your grandfather, how is his arthritis today? And so the little boy ran to his grandfather in the living room. Grandpa, how's your arthritis today? And the grandfather moaned and groaned. Oh, it's really bad today. And on rainy days like this, it's much more worse. Oh, the pain, groaned the grandfather. So the little boy went back to his mother. Mom, Grandpa said he's in a lot of pain today. His arthritis is really bad, and that rainy days like this makes it worse. Then the little boy looked at his mom, and he said, Mom, now will you tell me what NLP is? And the mother looked down into her son's eyes, and she said, Yes, son, I will tell you what NLP is. But before I tell you what NLP is, I want you to go back into the living room and ask your grandfather, what is the funniest thing you remember you ever did when you were just a little boy? So the little boy ran back into the room with his grandfather. Grandpa, can you tell me what's the funniest thing I ever did when I was just a little bitty boy? And the grandfather burst into laughter. Oh, wow. There are so many different memories I have of you that are so funny. But one memory sticks, and one memory comes to mind. There was this time I took you on a trip with me to the store, and we were walking down the street and you were singing a nursery rhyme that you had just learned. And I guess you were singing quite loudly because as we passed by, a man on the street, looked down at you and gave you a snarky little look, put his hands on his hips and said, Well, why don't you just quit making all of that noise? And the funniest thing happened. You looked up at that man and you said, I'll sing as loud as I want, egghead. Oh, ho, 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 left the grandfather. And so the little boy went back into the kitchen with his mom. Mom, Grandpa laughed so much. He laughed so loud. He told me the story. He seemed very happy. And it was very funny. And the mother looked at her son and said, Yes. The little boy said, Now, Mom, will you tell me what is NLP? And the mother looked at her son and she said, Son, do you see how you changed your grandfather's mood, experience, and attitude with just a few words? That, my son, is NLP. So let's go on to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about who uses NLP, who needs NLP, or who can use NLP, right? And so we have here a list. Doctors use NLP or can use NLP because NLP is a great tool for communication, for effective and efficient communication. And as we all know, doctors really need to be able to communicate with their patients and most often to be able to share what is not so good news with their patients in a way that is not so alarming. So NLP communication skills will really come in handy for doctors. And there are many doctors who do use these skills. Therapists use NLP. There is actually a whole system of psychotherapy that is based around NLP. It is called NLP therapy. It is becoming more and more popular. There is some scientific research that is being done with NLP to study the effects that it has in therapeutic situations. Next, we have educators. Educators can use NLP because educators have to communicate their ideas and their lessons to their students, and NLP can help them do that. Parents. Parents need NLP. You're dealing with your children for their whole lives, and oftentimes we have to communicate with our children, and in communicating with them comes a great deal of responsibility that the parents have to bear in how they communicate with their children, how they guide, how they direct their children so that their children can have a successful life. They need to be able to deal with many of the problems that their children are going to have to face in life. And so being able to communicate in a way that is very effective and that helps the parent to successfully achieve communication and directing and guiding their children. In that NLP can be very useful. We see salesmen. Oh, this should be a no-brainer. Salesmen using NLP skills in order to persuade and manipulate people into buying things, especially insurance and car salesmen. These guys are amazing, um, amazing practitioners of NLP skills. Um, all you have to do is just go to any store, electronic store, go to any car place, and speak to the car salesman, and you will see how committed these salespersons are to selling you that car. And they have learned many different techniques and strategies, ways to speak, and using intonation, using vocal markers or physical markers through their body language, and various other skills in order to persuade and influence buyers. Lawyers use NLP, or they can use NLP, or they need NLP. Um, Lawyers, as we know, have to speak in front of many people all the time, jurors, as well as judges. And lawyers need to be persuasive because that's what they do. They fight for their clients, and so they have to fight against other lawyers who is also trying to persuade, the situation, the case in favor of their clients. And so NLP, the ability to persuade and influence the thinking, feeling, and behaviors of others is definitely a skill that lawyers can use. Police officers. You have to be really careful when talking with police officers. And most attorneys will tell you to not even speak to police officers, to don't say anything to them other than what your name is, like giving your identification, because anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. And anyone who has been stopped, by the police, especially those of us who live within the African American community, the black community, we often experience being stopped by police officers for what we consider to be no reason at all. And then the police seem to us to be, suspiciously searching for something to harass us about, to arrest us for. And oftentimes they ask, very weird, very strange questions, the kinds of questions that would seem to cause us to incriminate ourselves. Things like, well, where's the gun? Or where are the drugs? The kinds of questions that presuppose that whatever they're asking us is already the case. And so it's important to be very cautious when dealing with police officers because many of them do use many techniques from NLP. So be wary of that. Politicians. Oh, this is another one that should come as no surprise. We were talking about the higher ups and the very elites within society. Well, that's the politicians. I mean, it's no secret to us that politicians get up there behind that podium and they spew, all of these words at us, trying to influence and convince us to agree with what it is they have to say, to sway us to their policies, to the laws, to the codes, to the statutes that they want to push. And so politicians are very, very skilled at using NLP and hypnotic techniques, linguistic hypnosis, which is an aspect of NLP as well, which we are going to see later on as we get into further shows, later on down the line. So next we see public speakers. Public speakers can use or need to use NLP. You're speaking in front of crowds all the time. What better, what better skill to have than NLP to help you communicate effectively, to help you persuade and influence others to undertake or to side with your perspective or to agree with whatever information you are communicating. NLP just in general, even if it's not about getting someone to agree with you, in general, NLP is very useful in getting your ideas across to others. So public speakers can really benefit from this. Next, we have personal growth seekers. Along with language, again, remember NLP is many things, and because it modeled many different systems. And one of the systems that NLP came to model is psychology. And so, being that NLP models psychology, it has many tools and techniques that come from psychology. And these techniques that come, these psychological techniques can be used by individuals who seek personal development and growth. People in relationships. Oh, this is a good one. Now, this is a good one because anyone who has ever been in a relationship knows how important communication is. And so the better we are able to get our ideas across, and the better we are able to understand the ideas of our significant others, the better we can, form a communication that really helps to make the relationship stay in rapport and stay tight and build a close bond. And so NLP is something that many individuals in relationships should look into in order to help them be better and effective communicators in their relationships. Anyone who communicates. Anyone who communicates should use NLP. I mean, do I need to say again how amazing, how effective and impactful NLP is in allowing others, the individual, to be able to communicate effectively, to get one's ideas across to others, even in a subtle way. NLP is amazing for that. So anyone who speaks, anyone who communicates can use NLP. Moving on to the next slide. And so this concludes this very short presentation on NLP. And I hope that you all have learned something here. I hope that you all are interested in seeing the shows that are to come on this series in NLP and dark psychology. Because remember, the whole purpose for me doing this series is to help you all be able to recognize when someone is using NLP on you to manipulate you, to persuade and influence you, your thinking, your feelings, and your actions to do things that you may not even really want to do, but they want to persuade and manipulate you to do it, because it's going to benefit them, like car salesmen, for example. So this will conclude this particular presentation, this particular show. I hope you've enjoyed it, and feel free to leave feedback and also ask any questions you may have, and I'll get to them in later presentations, later shows to come in this series on NLP